Hi, everyone. Marysia Lopez. I am the program manager for Justice, Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion in the College of Arts and Sciences.
Thank you, Marisha. So before we get started, we're going to be throwing around terms, and I just want to make sure that we're all on the same page. And you might have heard these terms used in many ways. And so for today's conversation, it's about leadership and how we show up. And so when we reference equity, we're talking about the state, quality, or ideal of being just, impartial, and fair, typically related to making reparations or remedying conditions for groups that have been historically excluded or marginalized. And so that could be based on a race, gender, sexual orientation, economic statuses, and other social identities. And also, when you think about equity, it's often viewed as a systemic perspective where we start to unpack how to create, support, and sustain social justice in the work that we do, whether that's bringing in equitable ideas, sharing power, resources, and creating strategies and conditions and habits that change the cultural or the culture that we're a part of. And so when you lean into leadership, one of the things that we want to highlight, because we're going to be talking about shared equity leadership, Marisha is going to jump a little bit more into that. But just want to highlight that leadership when we talk about leadership, we are trying to help folks understand that it's non-positional, it's non-authority based, collective process of directing or carrying out strategic agendas. It is not solely on actions and traits, and it's not a single person. Leadership is about a team of individuals being leaders, no matter of your title or what position you hold on campus. And it also includes students, faculty, and staff. And so everyone in this space is a leader. And that's what we wanted to clarify when we throw that in there. Another thing I want to highlight is we're going to be talking about shared equity leadership. But before we do that, I want to point us to shared leadership. And so the traditional model, which is to my left, is that triangle that does the top-down approach where the leader is a decision, or not the leader, the supervisor or the person that's in charge, whether that's a manager, a boss, whatever we call that person, they're the ones that are making all decisions for everything. And so there's no input from the team, although often we see that there are people who are frontline people engaging with the people that they're serving, but their consideration or their feedback is never taken into consideration. And so the top-down approach is something that we're trying to question and change so that people can think about not the traditional way of leadership, but the shared equity leadership model. And so the shared leadership invites us to think of a bottom top approach. Everyone's involved, no one's left out, everyone has a role. In this right side scenario, you have people who are contributing to all ideas, event planning, there is agency, there is empowerment and trust from the leader that their team will carry out projects. There is an opportunity where often people don't have to ask for permission. So I don't know how many of you work with a leader where you had to ask for permission even to go and speak with someone, or you had to ask for permission to add something to the event. And this is a different model. So the shared equity, the shared leadership model invites for that agency to be a part of the process with the idea that everyone's communicating and we are being trusted to carry out the work. And so with that, why shared equity leadership model is important is that research has shown it is more equitable. It requires for everyone to be included at all levels, right? So at the beginning, we share even student voices, faculty, staff, all aspects of the community is being involved when it comes to decision making. And it also includes invitation for people to make decisions, right? And so the decisions are not being made alone by one individual, but rather people are coming together to say, does this make sense for our team? Can we talk about it? Does this make sense for the people that we're serving? Who are the people that we're serving? And everyone's involved in that decision-making process. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over to Marisha, who's going to talk about shared equity. Now we're adding the shared equity leadership model. Thank you, Marisha. I'm going to pass it over to you.
Thank you. So in 2021, Adriana Kazar and others conducted a qualitative multiple case study in 2 phases. Phase 1 was carried out in the first half of 2020 and involved interviews with 63 influential individuals that were at institutions of higher education. And these individuals were known for a record of making progress on their equity goals. The findings consistently outlined the essence of shared equity leadership among these different institutions. And then phase 2 of this study is actually ongoing, and that delves deeper into studying individual roles, team dynamics, and structures across campuses through focus groups, observations, and document analysis. Then fast forward a little bit to 2023, Senior Vice Chancellor Sonia De Luca Fernandez, Senior Vice Chancellor for Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, began speaking with administrators across campus about the shared equity leadership model and was encouraging its adoption within the various units and colleges. So Patricia and I are here sharing this presentation with you because while Sonia's presentations have covered best practices for the shared equity leadership model, those presentations have not gone any further than that, really. We want to make sure that all staff in the college feel empowered to adopt this shared equity leadership model approach, regardless of your position within ANS. Next slide, thank you. So the shared equity leadership model is really a framework. At the very foundation of the shared equity leadership model is the notion of collaborating or working together to enact the institution's equity goals. So the SEL is a framework for the following: a critical mass of people who are committed to undertaking a personal journey toward critical consciousness, who share equity-focused values, and enact specific practices to promote more just and equitable outcomes. So in simpler terms, we basically need a critical mass, a large portion of the population in an organization to undertake this commitment to equity and then enact practices that reflect that commitment. Next slide. So another important aspect of shared equity leadership is critical consciousness. And what does critical consciousness mean? Basically, it means becoming aware of an issue and then doing something about it. So here, critical consciousness is defined as reflect on and becoming critically aware of social, political, and economic oppression and the resulting social injustices. Identify and navigate the structural constraints and social inequities that limit human agency and well-being. And lastly, acquire the skills and resources needed to transform oppressive elements to create a just society. So this is where our personal journeys really come into play with shared equity leadership, and Patricia will get into that a little more later. A leader's personal journey helps them develop the values that are necessary to share in that leadership towards equity, as well as carry out the practices necessary to enact this type of leadership. And shared equity leadership is a continuous process. So we have a quote here from the study that was published. While some sort of personal transformation or critical consciousness is generally necessary for leaders who engage in shared equity leadership, the values and practices are all connected and interact with one another in a mutually reinforcing way. So the shared equity leadership model, it can be kind of difficult to wrap our heads around, I think, because it's not a linear journey with a clear stopping point or goal. And the elements of shared equity leadership do not operate statically or separately either. And I will now pass it over to Patricia.
Thank you, Marysia. And Marysia shared that shared equity leadership is a conscious process, right? So you have to understand, where am I thinking about change, and how does it translate to equity amongst the people that I'm looking to create that change for. And so some examples of how equity, share equity leadership can show up in the work that we do and also in leadership in our roles is that it makes equity and student success everyone's work. And so often or traditionally, you can see an office or an individual similar to Marysia and I that are doing this work, but it makes it everyone works. And I want to give a shout out to Bernadette, who is someone who always thinks of college first, right? We came up with the college success team to acknowledge that everyone's work should be students, staff, and faculty support, right? Not just an individual, but how do we share the work and how do we make sure that everyone's contributing to the success of all individuals in the College of Arts and Sciences? And it also ties to personal and organizational work, right? It has to be a personal commitment. It can't just be another afterthought or just another task that was added to your workload. It is a personal commitment within the team, within the organization, the unit, the division, and it also creates change in the culture. It transforms, so it's not transactional, it's transformational, where people are being empowered to be a part of that change, and we're creating systems that are sustainable and lasting as well. And it builds on structures and accountability. So there is a clear distinction. We understand what the process is. There is transparency in that process, and we are not wondering, well, who is making those decisions and for who and for what reason? And it also builds on authentic relationships, trust, and it's a process that invites emotions to be a part of that process. And so we just want you to think about those examples, but we'll give you more specific examples of what that might look like for the College of Arts and Sciences. And so when you're thinking about the share equity leadership model, there's going to be an invitation for you to consider your personal journey, which Marysia shared, the values that come with that personal journey and the practices. And so we're going to go one by one just to give you a little bit of what that looks like when you think about your own personal journey, values, and practices, and putting the share equity leadership model at the center of all of that. When you're thinking about the personal journey, there's 3 entry points. The goal is, like Marysia said, that critical consciousness of I am aware and I am going to take action. And so the 3 points to think about when you're thinking about your personal journey is equity a part of who I am? And is it related to my identity? And I often think about equity as something that everyone benefits from. I think about, for example, when you think about creating a ramp, oftentimes people forget, well, that ramp is not just for people with visible or invisible disabilities. It also creates access for someone who's pushing a stroller. If I'm dragging a wheelchair, luggage, I'm also having access to just pull that luggage up, right? It creates access for a lot of people. And often people think equity is just exclusive to a certain type of person. But I want you to think about sidewalks, right? That ramp, right? When you see the ramp, it creates access for many people. It's not just for a specific type of person. And so is that a part of my identity? Something I want to invite you to think about. Is equity part of my identity, my work? Does it equity become a part of my personal work commitment, right? Am I at work saying, well, I was a part of this search committee and something happened that should not have happened? Am I a part of thinking about those conversations? Am I questioning what just happened and making sure that it's rectified or corrected or changed, whatever that might look like? And it also invites you to think about your own development and commitment. So being that part of that personal journey and being transformational requires for us to do the work, right? Requires for us to do some reading, for us to attend some workshops. You are all here today, so you are doing the work, right? But it's a continuous process, as Marysia shared, that doesn't end just with one workshop or one event. It continues to build because we're continuing to learn and unlearn some of these things. And so when you think about the values piece, it's so important to center your values, what you're committed to. And often, as the College of Arts and Sciences is working on the reorg, which also includes our mission, vision, and values, but I want you to think about your department, your own personal, your own, whether you're in a division, wherever you are in the college, I want you to think about what are those values. Is love and care a part of that? Vulnerability, humility. Am I able to make mistakes and learn from my mistakes? Or am I getting in trouble because I made a mistake or a quote unquote mistake? Am I able to have courage to share my truth, to share feedback? Am I able to receive transparency? Am I able to be transparent? Am I comfortable being uncomfortable? Is that part of my values? Am I self-accountable? And am I also understanding of what accountability looks like for others? And then, of course, am I allowed to be creative, innovative? Am I allowed to be, or not even allowed, am I invited? Am I a part of being part of that creativity and innovation? And or am I just put to the side and none of my values are being considered in that moment? And so I want you to think about all the values that you hold as an individual, whether they reflect the ones you see here or not. Think about how those values show up in the work that you're doing and also in your personal journey to becoming more conscious when it comes to equity and work. When you think about practices now, so we have personal values and practices. The practice invite us to shift the culture, and that can look like building trust. Is it that we have psychological safety in our department to be able to share feedback and not be gaslighted, not get in trouble for being able to say, this is what's creating a barrier for people, we need to change it? Is it cultivating positive relationships? This is the practices are in the engagement, the continuous engagement amongst teams, amongst people. I want you to think about the relational practices, whether that's welcoming disagreement or tensions. Am I allowed to have those difficult conversations at work? And then the other piece is practice that challenge the status quo. Am I invited to question, to think about how this practice really impacts negatively the people that we're looking to serve? Am I able to disrupt what I just heard that is not okay and change that? I want you to think about also communication practices, right? Is my language being used intentionally? Am I setting expectations for long term? Is there listening happening when we're speaking? And then the developmental practices invite us to continue that continuous work that we talked about in the personal journey, right? Continuing to learn and unlearn sometimes, helping others learn and empowering people to model. We're modeling what it looks like to be empowered, to be a part of that change. And then on the other side, you have the structural practices, which can lead to deeper conversations around hiring, recruitment, making decisions, right? Thinking about who's making decisions and for who, and how are people not a part of those conversations that need to be a part of those conversations. You're thinking about rewards and incentives and who's being rewarded and who's being incentivized to do this work, but who's also being left out of those conversations. You're thinking about policies and how we need to change those policies so that people can feel a greater sense of community and belonging on this campus and at A&S. And you're also thinking about implementing new approaches for accountability, right? Making sure that we're understanding, well, who is accountable for what and who do I need to go to when it comes to whatever issue that I may have. And so with that, we just want to talk about accountability a little bit. And so accountability is something that we're trying to do better in the College of Arts and Sciences. These are conversations that we're constantly having about being transparent with the community and how the deans can be more responsible with the work that we're doing, but also create responsibility and accountability for those that we serve. And so when you think about responsibility, I want you to think about the expectations for defined roles of each team member, right? We each have a responsibility in our roles and the work that we were hired to do. And it's more task oriented, but accountability on the other side is inviting people to take ownership for results, right? To really think about what are the outcomes that I'm focusing on when I lead this conversation, for example, this presentation. What are the outcomes that I want to gain from having this student event, or what are the outcomes that I want to achieve when I think about community roundtable and inviting alumni to that table, right? Really thinking about the focus results. And so responsibility, we all have that, right? But accountability is where we need to consider thinking who do we hold accountable, but also what does that accountability look like for me as well? So with that, I'm going to pass it over to you, Marysia, who's going to be talking about what does share equity leadership look like when we talk about accountability in the traditional model, and then the SEL, the share equity leadership model.
Yeah, so we have two sides on this slide. On the left side, you'll see traditional accountability, and on the right side is SEL, expanded accountability. So under traditional accountability structures, we may see chief diversity officers or diversity committees, and these people are accountable to external groups like boards and legislatures. Under the shared equity leadership model, there are leaders at every level that are responsible for self-accountability, as well as being accountable to the regional, local, and campus communities. Next slide, please. In the SEL model, we move toward measuring behaviors, processes, and climate rather than institutional level outcomes like retention and graduation rates. So the SEL allows for measurement over a longer time frame rather than looking at a single point in time. And this can be really advantageous especially when we're looking at equity-minded goals. Single institutional level strategic plans are replaced with multiple plans linked to units and to individuals, performance systems, and budgets. And when you have those smaller plans that are revisited on a regular basis, you're more likely to be able to adjust and respond to problems in real time. Next slide. So I have this example here that it brings together actual facts or actual events from the study that was conducted by Adriana Kazar and others, but I have slightly changed or adapted the rules to fit our purposes a little better. So let's take a look at this example of SEL being put into practice over the course of, I don't know, let's say a year or so. It could be less than that, it could be more than that, but let's say a year. So on the left is the action taken, and on the right is the SEL principle that was modeled by that action. So a department's office manager works to create more diverse candidate pools. And by creating those more diverse candidate pools, the staff around her, the student employees are more diverse. They're able to make more diverse hires. So the principal model is diverse hiring practices. The office manager tells their team that they need everyone's expertise. And then that office manager shares with their team their own journey with diversity and equity work. And here the office manager is building trust, humility, is modeling vulnerability. The team undergoes an anti-racist training together. And this is just an example. It could be really any other kind of training. And this is the whole team together, let's say the whole department. So staff, student employees, faculty, chair, etc. And here we're seeing people learning and helping others to learn and unlearn, as Patricia had mentioned earlier. When an issue arises concerning the equity of a new student policy within the department, the office manager hears concerns and takes these to the chair. So here we are welcoming disagreements and we're unpacking them respectfully. And finally, the chair does ultimately adopt the policy, but works with staff members to address the equity issues and to better support students that are affected by the policy. So we're seeing a step in the direction of dismantling inequitable structures. So the office manager in this example sets the tone in the department among the staff and student employees by, let's say, that first step, let's say they worked with our office to establish those diverse hiring practices. They then acknowledge that they cannot do this work on their own. And so they're empowering people around them as experts in their own areas and then modeling that vulnerability too. Departmental trust is built by learning and then unlearning altogether. Disagreements over issues of equity are unpacked respectfully and voices are heard, and the department's chair and staff continue working together toward the goal of addressing inequities. So Is this example 100% perfect? No. The chair ended up adopting the policy that the department staff members found inequitable. I think it's an unfortunate fact that sometimes we cannot change someone's actions. But the chair is now more aware of the issues surrounding the policy. Everyone's concerns have been heard, and the department will continue to foster an environment of trust and critical consciousness together. And lastly, I wanted to point out how our office may have been helpful along the way. So for that first step, I mentioned maybe the office manager approached Patricia and I to learn more about diverse hiring practices. For that third step, maybe the department reached out to our office for that training. So this work is not happening in a vacuum. And I think this illustrates why I was so intrigued by this SEL model, because it gives agency to everyone rather than delegating DEI work to just the DEI professionals. I think it can be tempting to view this model as taking away from the DEI professionals, but I think it's actually a way for everyone to do the work together rather than in our own little silos.
Yeah, thank you, Marisha. And one of the things I wanted to add is that Marisha and I were talking about how the reality is some of you may have a channel where you can give feedback. Everything's clear, transparency. Your person who's in charge of the team always welcomes your thoughts and takes into consideration your work and gives you agency to produce a program, even though that wasn't a part of your job description, because it's something that you care about and you want to accomplish. And so the other point is that some of you may not, right? You try giving feedback and it's just going out the window. You see decisions being made, and often you're like, did we not as a team talk about how that decision made affects everyone negatively, right? And so I want you to think about, because we're recording, we were going to originally invite people to share, but I want you to think about those scenarios, right? And think about, where am I in my team and who needs to be a part of these conversations? And it could lead to us hosting something like this with your own team, and just so that the person in charge or the person who's overseeing the team can have an understanding of what share equity leadership looks like, and also being able to create agency, as Marisha shared, to empower everyone to be a part of that change. And so I want you to think about that. Where am I? Am I in a situation where I can 100% give feedback? My thoughts and considerations are considered at all times? Or am I in a place where I can't even share feedback because I might be retaliated, or I might be looked at as someone who shouldn't be speaking, right? I want you to think about those scenarios as well.
Yeah, thank you for that.